Hi friends, I'm Scott Giles and welcome to Power Talk, my podcast here on Facebook Live and YouTube. I cover topics related to hypnotic coaching, spirituality, and the hypnotic arts and sciences generally. If you'd like to know more about my professional work or sign up for my free e-newsletter Power Lines, check out my website, which I'll tag at the end of this video. Well, today I want to talk about the second part of a topic I started last week. I'm recommending a pair of spiritual exercises that I think will benefit you if you choose to do them. Last week I did my podcast about the spiritual exercise called the Examine. This is a careful, thoughtful self-examination about one's values, the successes or difficulty you've had in living up to those values, and a listing of the mistakes you've made as you've navigated life's journey. Roughly, this corresponds to the fourth step in 12-step programs. The response I got to that podcast was interesting, with several viewers wondering if I was recommending that people should beat themselves up. And of course, that's not my intent. All treatment begins with diagnosis. Before you know what to do to make things better, you need to first have a sense of where things have gone off track. And that is the purpose of the Examine. It's not about feeling guilty or bad, it's about figuring out where to begin most effectively in the campaign for self-improvement and self-empowerment. Once you've done an Examine, then you're in a position to do the second part, the affirmatio, or to make the affirmation. Now, in the literature of classical spirituality, we see this sort of thing most clearly in documents like the Confessions of St. Augustine, which he wrote in about the year 400 Common Era. Augustine wrote the book in his mid-40s, so it's not a lifetime reflection. Much of the book is taken up with St. Augustine explaining the path that brought him to his current spiritual position. In the first 9 chapters of the Confessions, he expresses regret and candidly recounts what he realized were mistakes, such as his flirtation with Manichaean theology, a Christian heresy. He also recounts that he led an immoral life. Now, this is not unusual among younger guys who have not had the life experience that would allow them to acquire better self-control, but that part of his book constituted his Examine. The last 4 books in the Confessions are theological. In them, Augustine affirms the positive lessons he has learned, the lessons he wanted to take away from his mistakes. And that is the first movement in the affirmation. You want to remember and be grateful for the lessons you've learned over your life, but while remembering the lessons, you want to try to forget the mistakes. That is, you don't beat yourself up about something you learned from. Making mistakes and self-correcting is how human learning occurs. Now, in my own spiritual direction experiences, I was guided to a second step as well, reportedly found in the writings of the Buddha. One of my spiritual directors was a Buddhist monk, and in the writings of St. Francis, because another spiritual director was a Franciscan. This step was to realize that a lot of the things I felt bad about were not really things I had meaningful control over. It's not my fault that I found myself in an abusive family of origin. As I did, I made several attempts to cope with that, And some of those attempts were spectacular failures. Setting the assistant principal's car on fire is one such memory that comes to mind. Now, he was in fact a cruel bastard of a person, but I may have overreacted somewhat. So while I might acknowledge that I didn't make the best choice possible from a moral perspective, I can affirm that the choice I made was for a healthy reason to stop abuse. It had some effectiveness. The son of a bitch left me alone after that. And while I would make a different choice now, my choice then was at least understandable. I was speaking with a client recently who had just gotten out of a troubled marriage. He regrets the anger and harsh words he said to his ex-wife as he was going through that. But it really does seem that she was trying to provoke him into doing things that she could use as weapons against him, and no one should ever do that to another person. So while he does regret his words and his anger, they are also understandable given the context, and at least he can affirm that he was trying to take care of himself, however imperfectly. And in this you see the essence of the spiritual exercise of the affirmation. You're not trying to list your mistakes. Instead, you list and affirm what you learned from them. In the process, you'll often find that you discover reasons to cut yourself some slack. The family you grew up in might actually have been awful. The boss at work might actually have been an unfair creep, and that's why you walked out. The affirmation should be a positive process. And you know you've done it right if you feel settled at the end of it. If you end up gleeful or with anger renewed, you've not done the work correctly. If done correctly, you should feel a sense of completion when the exercise is over. Been there, learn from it, understand why I did what I did, and then without further praise or blame, you go on with your life, benefiting from the lessons and not over focusing on the mistakes, but understanding them instead. Hey, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll be back next week with another talk on a different subject. You are invited to join me. It does help me if you let others know about my work and my videos, so please like, share, and subscribe. And if I can be of help to you, feel free to reach out through email, my website, or my Patreon channel. Have a great week.